Alright, so we're going to talk about functions in Scala in this video. Let's start with a simple function called Scala fun, and we will return a string. So we use the def keyword to define a function. We call it Scala fun, and it will return this happy face. So we call Scala fun like that. And we can see that once Scala fun is called, it returns that string, and that looks very happy in this font. All right, so let's define a function with a little bit different syntax. So we can define more fun. We're going to add the parentheses afterwards, and we'll just make it return that string. So previously, we defined the function without these parentheses. Now we're defining it with the parentheses. When the function doesn't take any arguments, the parentheses are optional. So we can invoke more fun like that, and we can see that that string of 3 exclamation points is returned. All right, let's define a function that's a little bit more complicated. We'll call it tall, and it will return the string alto. And it looks a little ugly in the text editor here, especially because I added the extra space. So let's actually move over here. I'm going to define that function tall equals alto. We can call that function here. So that didn't return anything because we didn't print anything. So I need to. All right, so I'm gonna call this function print line tall. So this should return alto, the string alto, and it does. So down here we can see we're defining the function. We're using the def keyword. This tall is the name of the function. When it's a multi-line function, we have to use these curly braces. And in the body, we put what the function is going to return. All right, so let's define a function that's a little bit more complicated. Let's define me like thing string and string, and let's make this as I like thing. Okay, so here we're defining a function. Again, we're using the def keyword, which is a reserved keyword for defining functions. We're naming the function me like. Me like takes one argument. We're naming the argument to be thing. The argument has to be a string, and me like returns a string. That's what this second string means. Here we're using string interpolation to create the string I like plus whatever the value of thing is. So if we do me like cats, missing the parentheses. So this should return I like cats. Here we can see that we've got an error, not found type sting. So I mistyped this. So this is string. All right, let's try that again. I'm always screwing up typing on these videos. So we can see that I like cats is returned here. If we change this argument to be dogs, we will see that it works as well. Another way of invoking this function is we can specify the parameter. So we can say thing equals birds. And this should give us I like birds. So there's multiple different ways of invoking functions in Scala. So let's define a function. Well, actually, let's just modify this function. And let's say that this returns an integer. Let's change this to be Pokemon. All right, so now we're saying that this me-like function can take a string as an argument and it returns an integer. We can see that this function actually does not return an integer. It returns a string. So when we run this code, it's going to error out because it's saying that your function is supposed to return an integer, but it's actually returning a string. This is one of the advantages of the statically typed nature of Scala. Alright, so let's go back here and let's define another function called multiply. And this will take x, which is an int, y, which is an int, return x times y, multiply, let's multiply 3 and 5. Alright, so here we have a function, we're defining it with the keyword def, we're naming it multiply. Multiply takes two arguments, both of which are integers, and it returns an integer, basically just taking the product of two integers. So if we run this code, we can see that 15 is returned as expected. If either of these arguments were not integers, this is going to error out. So again, just highlighting the statically typed nature of Scala. So the error messages are very great in Scala, so we can see type mismatch. We found a string birds. We require an integer. We require that integer right here. All right, so let's move on to one last final example, and that'll wrap up this introduction to functions. So let's make a cool cartoon function. Cool cartoon. And Pokemon. Pokemon is the theme of the day. Alright, so let's make this N is awesome. Cool cartoon. Alright, let's call it without arguments. So here we have a function. We're defining it with the def keyword. We're naming it cool cartoon. It takes in one parameter n, which is a string. And then this equal sign here, this makes it a default argument. So this means that if n is not defined, it's going to use the string Pokemon. If n is defined, it's going to use whatever it's defined. Here we're saying that this cool cartoon function returns a string, and that string is going to be the variable n, followed by the string is awesome. So if we run this, we should get the return Pokemon is awesome, which is a true statement. Let's see what happens if we explicitly define something and override the default. So let's, what's another example of a cartoon avatar? Great show if you haven't watched it. Okay, so here it will say avatar is awesome. So basically the way default arguments work is if nothing is defined, it will use the default. If a string is defined or an argument is defined, it will use whatever's defined. So that wraps up the introduction to functions. Thank you for watching.